Following Batman's introduction into the Snyderverse and Batman vs. Superman, fans immediately began wondering who would play his arch-nemesis, the Clown Prince of Crime. And while Jared Leto would eventually win the role, going full method for his brief appearance in Suicide Squad, his standalone film would ultimately never happen, as Warner Brothers would pivot and make Todd Phillips Joker instead, earning Joaquin Phoenix an Oscar and effectively shutting the door on Leto continuing as the character. However, after seeing Joker, many fans were quick to notice the film's similarities to both Martin Scorsese's The King of Comedy and Taxi Driver, fueling rumors that Scorsese himself almost directed the film, which would have starred his frequent collaborator Leonardo Dicaprio. So let's dive in and find out what happened behind the scenes and take a look at what could have been Joker. During the premiere of War Dogs, the film's director, Todd Phillips, who is also behind blockbuster comedies such as Old School and The Hangover, realized that his newest film was unlikely to set the world on fire, leading him to ask himself, what do people want to see? Feeling like he could no longer make raunchy comedies in the post-woke landscape, Phillips looked to reinvent himself by making an irreverent, gritty, Martin Scorsese-like drama, but wasn't sure how to give it mass appeal in order to get it greenlit. The answer would come to him when looking up at a billboard for a comic book movie, as he realized he could get away with it if he disguised his film as one too. His idea would be a character study on the Joker, which would explore how a marginalized and bullied clown with childhood trauma descends into violence and insanity. Phillips would set the film in 1981 in an effort to assure Warner Brothers that it wouldn't interfere with anything they had going on in their DC universe, and make it free from any possibility of a crossover event. Still, Warner Brothers feared that an R-rated Joker film would alienate younger comic book fans and hurt the film's box office. Not only that, but there was a ton of Joker merchandise in the market aimed at kids, and Warner Brothers worried about the potential backlash from parents due to the bloody and violent nature of Phillips' Joker film. Eventually, Phillips was able to convince WB executives to allow him to write the script, except by the time he finished it a year and a half later, those executives were gone, forcing him to have to convince an entire new team of people to greenlight the project. And this was no small task, considering there was already a Joker film in development. After appearing as the Joker in David Ayer's Suicide Squad, Jared Leto lamented that many of his scenes were left on the cutting room floor, while fans were disappointed that his appearance in the film amounted to a glorified cameo when he was a centerpiece of the film's marketing. And while Leto hoped to expand on the character in a future standalone film, unfortunately, his interpretation of the Joker, and what little screen time he had, received mixed reviews from fans, somewhat dampening enthusiasm for such a project. Not to mention, the studio was unhappy with Leto's pretentious method acting antics, allegedly giving his fellow castmates a variety of inappropriate gifts, such as a dead pig, anal beads, a pet rat, and used condoms. On the other hand, Margot Robbie's standout performance as Harley Quinn led to her getting her own spin-off film, Birds of Prey, which the studio planned to follow up with a Harley Quinn and Joker movie. Warner Bros. Would hire the writers of Bad Santa, Glenn Ficarra and John Requa, to write the script, and they described the project as a relationship movie, but with the sensibility of Bad Santa. For example, the film would have opened with Harley kidnapping Dr. Phil to help with her and Joker's relationship problems. Both writers would call it the most fun they ever had writing a script. And if you've seen the dark comedy that they wrote called I Love You, Phillip Morris, that largely flew under the radar, starring Jim Carrey and Ewan McGregor as two lovers who meet in prison, that should give you a pretty good idea of the unhinged tone they were probably going for with their Joker and Harley movie, which they called a love story featuring two mentally deranged people. While this was all happening, Warner Brothers, nervous about the dark tone of Todd Phillips' Joker film, would finally, albeit reluctantly, greenlight the project with a small budget, at least small relative to other comic book movies, in the hopes that the film's minimal financial backing would dissuade Phillips from making it. Leto, caught off guard by the announcement of a competing Joker film, was allegedly so upset that he asked his music manager, Irving Azoff, to go over Warner Brothers' heads and make their parent company force WB to cancel the film. Azoff would refuse before the two would part ways. Leto would then fire his agency and leave CAA, feeling they should have told him about Phillips' film earlier and fought harder for his version of Joker. Although insiders claim Leto burned through 4 different teams of agents at CAA who would run out of patience for the actor's behavior. This brings us to Martin Scorsese, who caused a lot of controversy with his comments about superhero films not being cinema, but rather being more akin to theme park rides. And while he wasn't wrong, sometimes superhero films do cross over from being just fun popcorn movies to cinematic works of art, like Chris Nolan's The Dark Knight. Rumors have long since swirled that Scorsese was approached to direct Joker based on an interview he gave with the BBC, but that's not entirely true, as his words were taken out of context. And those words were, "I thought about it a lot over the past 4 years. I decided that I didn't have the time for it, but Todd told me, 'Marty, this is yours,' and I said, said, "I don't know if I want to." Now, most people took this to mean that Marty debated directing the film for 4 years after Phillips offered it to him. However, that's not what either man meant. What actually happened was that Phillips sent Scorsese the script and asked him if he'd come aboard as an executive producer. And when he said to Scorsese, "This is yours," what he meant is that Joker was heavily influenced by Scorsese's previous films like Taxi Driver and King of Comedy, suggesting that Joker was a product of Scorsese. However, this raises another question. Why would Phillips reach out to Scorsese to come aboard as an EP? Did he simply want his blessing for basically making a loose remake of the King of Comedy? Or was there another reason? Well, it's been heavily reported that Warner Brothers wanted Phillips to cast Leonardo Dicaprio as the Joker, hoping to use his frequent collaborator Martin Scorsese's involvement in the film to try and attract him. This wouldn't be the first time Warner Brothers would try and cast DiCaprio in a DC film. After Heath Ledger's passing and after The Dark Knight came out, Warner Brothers pushed for Nolan to make the Riddler the primary villain in the third film, with the idea that DiCaprio, who Nolan was working with at the time on Inception, should play him. Even Zack Snyder would approach DiCaprio about playing Lex Luthor in BVS, but DiCaprio would pass, but not before suggesting that Superman should eventually fight the Justice League, and DiCaprio would pass because he had a strict no superhero rule, and it was a rule he would pass on to Timothée Chalamet, telling the young actor no hard drugs and no superhero movies. Reflecting on Phillips' Joker film, Scorsese would say had he directed it, he wasn't sure he could make the next step with Arthur Fleck developing into a comic book character by the end of the film. Plus, he was busy with The Irishman. Phillips would then pivot and ask Scorsese if he could hire his producer, Emma Tillinger-Koskov, who Phillips called the Queen of New York, to help Phillips with crewing the film and securing locations due to her experience shooting in the Big Apple. With Scorsese out and DiCaprio merely a Warner Brothers pipe dream, one question remained: who would play the Joker? A few years earlier, Joaquin Phoenix was supposedly the first choice to replace Ed Norton as the Hulk in the Avengers, and was later even offered the role of Doctor Strange, both of which he turned down because he didn't want to commit to appearing in multiple sequels and cameos in other Marvel projects. Instead, he'd ask his agent if he could take one of these comic book characters and just make a low-budget character study out of it, thinking it would be neat if it was about one of the villains. Ironically, he dismissed doing this for the Joker, feeling the character had been done to death. That is until Phoenix got wind of Phillips' Joker project and realized it was exactly what he had wanted to do. Unbeknownst to him, Phillips had Phoenix in mind for the lead from the beginning. However, after meeting Phillips, Phoenix still showed some resistance to starring in the project. And while Phillips would try and convince the actor to sign on for months, he'd eventually learn that Phoenix finally had when he randomly showed up to a wardrobe fitting one day. Phoenix's performance, like Joker himself, was incredibly unpredictable, with the actor not only constantly improvising, like when he climbed into a fridge, but he would also often do something completely different take to take. The result of this, according to director Todd Phillips, was that there were tons of different versions of the movie based on how Phoenix would do things differently on each take. To round out the cast, Phillips would offer Oscar winner Frances McDormand the part of Joker's mother, but she declined. Alec Baldwin, who was originally in the running for Bruce Wayne in Tim Burton's Batman '89, after having worked with Burton on his previous movie Beetlejuice, would be cast as Thomas Wayne before dropping out. Allegedly, the filmmaker wanted to capitalize on Baldwin's popularity, parodying Donald Trump on SNL, and envisioned Baldwin's Wayne as a cheesy and tanned, Donald Trump-like 1980s businessman. It's been speculated that Baldwin didn't want to get typecast and exited the role. Robert De Niro, who stars as the wannabe comedian in The King of Comedy, which Joker is heavily inspired by, was cast in the late-night talk show host role originally played by Jerry Lewis in The King of Comedy, as a nod to the film's roots. One of the biggest differences between the script and the film involves Arthur's neighbor, Sophie. In the film, it's eventually revealed that all of Arthur's interactions with Sophie were figments of his imagination, similar to Tyler Durden in Fight Club. However, in the script, Arthur and Sophie form a genuine friendship, and while it's clear to us that she only started talking to Arthur because she pitied him, Arthur comes under the impression that they're dating. Eventually, he barges into her apartment, only to find her having sex with her boyfriend, which is one of the contributing factors that pushes Arthur over the edge. Also cut from the film were scenes of Sophie watching Arthur's appearance on the Murray Franklin show, which would have confirmed that the character was still alive, rather than leaving her fate ambiguous in the final film. Heath Ledger's Joker famously had scars on his face that formed a permanent smile, leading him to ask people if they wanted to know how he got his scars. In the original script to Phoenix's Joker, Arthur Fleck also would have had scars, which he tells Sophie were self-inflicted when he was 10. By the end of the film, Joker would take a piece of broken glass and make his scarred smile longer and happier. However, it's likely both Phillips and Phoenix elected to cut this from the film in order to distance Phoenix's Joker from Ledger's. And the result of all this was a performance that certainly did that, and was able to stand on its own, which is saying something considering the iconic versions of the character we've already seen by other talented actors over the years. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.